So first of all, welcome, obviously. Really nice to see you all here. It's our annual general meeting. It actually looks at the year that runs from 21 into 22, so we're a bit of looking back, really. And brilliant to be able to do it face-to-face, because, of course, I think we haven't done it face-to-face since something like 2019. It's been such a weird time. And really nice to see so many members of staff here. You're really welcome. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Michelle Romain. I'm the chair. The purpose is to report our performance and our finances for that period, and to give you some sense of what the high points have been, and indeed, certainly those of you that work for us will know some of the challenges that we've faced. So over the next hour or so, you'll get an opportunity to hear firsthand from some of our teams, get a sense of the work across the trust, and also an idea of what has been an exceptionally challenging period, not just for us, but for all health organisations. If you want a full copy of the annual report, you can find that on our website, or you can ask for a copy from our comms team, our communications team, and they're at mbtcommunications@nbt.nhs.uk. But ask, and we'll make sure. There are plenty of them in the room, and we'll make sure that we get one to you. I think it would be fair to say that we started this year in a spirit of optimism. We believed that the NHS and our staff would be recharging their batteries, that we'd be transitioning from the demands of the COVID pandemic to more routine work, continuing to be there for those who need us most urgently, and also starting to tackle the many people who have been left on long waiting lists because of COVID and the COVID lockdowns. As you will know, sadly, that optimism was rather short-lived. We found ourselves facing more challenges relating to COVID as the Omicron variant emerged and cases rose rapidly. This impacted not just our patients but also our staff. Many of them were off ill, many of them had to self-isolate, and there was a period where I know children at school, and they were being contacted and were having to leave to go and deal with the demands of children being brought out of school because of COVID. So really difficult time. Also increased demands on our services, more people needing the skills of our emergency care teams, more patients presenting with cancer, and sometimes that was because through COVID they hadn't been seen. So it was carrying on. At the same time, we continued to be focused on the absolute need to tackle the backlog of patients who are waiting for operations and procedures. We know only too well that every name on our waiting list is a person who needs treatment, and actually whose life is being affected in some way or other by the delays that they're facing. This has been, over this year we're talking about, and remains one of the most significant challenges, and it occupies the board, and it occupies the executive team and the leaders in the organisation all the time. The days when the country stood and clapped the NHS seem like a distant memory. I mean, I was outside banging a pan, I think, at one point. There's a public expectation that things were able to return to normality, that somehow or other it's over and done with. But actually, if you work in this organisation, it doesn't feel at all like that. The demands on the services are increasing. We've got a backlog of cases to deal with, and many of our staff are still emotionally and physically exhausted. Some have voted with their feet. And that leaves significant staffing issues for those that are still here. And all of that comes together to add really significant pressure on the organisation. So I want to take the opportunity of what is a very formal point in our year, the AGM, to actually say a really formal thank you to the staff of MBT for what has been a quite exceptional contribution. over the last year. I want to acknowledge how hard it's been and how hard it continues to be, and to recognise their commitment, their compassion and their dedication. We will, at some point in our lives, need these NHS qualities either for ourselves or for someone we love. We should make sure we continue to appreciate and to celebrate them. So I really want to record a formal thank you to all the staff, the volunteers, everybody who makes MBT possible. It's really important. As a trust, the welfare of our staff and volunteers over the last year has been uppermost in our minds. We simply could not deliver the care or services without every single one of them. And that's the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, and we see them as the face of the NHS because often they are the people who are interacting immediately with our patients. But we depend on lots of other people too. Hospitals simply couldn't run without the many more who provide the background support. There are so many individuals and teams behind the scenes ensuring that appointments are booked, equipment's ready for operations, that patients are fed, that the rooms are cleaned, that theatres are cleaned, that we have the right IT to support the clinicians in delivering the care. And sometimes they're the unsung heroes. And again, I want to make sure we say a thank you to all of them. Really important that what they do for us is appreciated. And then there are the volunteers who give up their time to support patients and staff across MBT in so many different roles. Thankfully, this year we were able to start welcoming them back as volunteers to our wards, having had to suspend these services during the pandemic. And so it's wonderful to see mealtime volunteers and patient befrienders coming back in again to support our teams and to sit and talk with patients. And in fact, I was on our cardiology ward this week and I bumped into one of our volunteers, and it was just terrific. He's a befriender, he was talking to patients, and he had been a patient, he had had many of the procedures that were facing the patients on the ward, and he was talking to someone who was actually really quite apprehensive about a procedure they were going to face that day, and he was able to offer support, talk about, oh, this bit's unpleasant, that bit, but it'll be quite straightforward, and you just realise what an enormously valuable service the volunteers are providing for us. So again, I want to say thank you to them. Finally, I want to just recognise the work we've been doing with our local partners, strengthening our relationships really to ensure we're working together to get the best results for the communities that we serve. So you see all the formality around an integrated care system and a change in legislation and the bringing together of health and social care across Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. But actually, what's really important is that we make that come alive and that we work closely across all the different elements that make up the services that we provide. So NBT has begun working much more closely with our sister hospital down the road, UHBW, through something that's called an acute provider collaborative. That's a grand name for a getting together with a shared ambition to make hospital care across the city more straightforward and more accessible. And we have got a number of projects that we are jointly working on, which we hope in time will deliver that ambition. So whilst this coming year remains extremely challenging, and believe you me, it does, and those of you working in frontline services will know just how that feels, we continue to be optimistic about the ways we're working to do the best for our patients and for our staff and for our communities. So once again, thank you to all the people who actually make MBT work. I'm proud, really proud, to be the chair of this organisation. It's filled with absolutely amazing people. I'd like now to invite our Chief Executive, who I think will take us through the year in a little bit more detail. Maria Kane.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michelle. And thank you to everyone who's come along today, especially those staff who've already done a long day at work and have stayed on to be with us today. And I'm also delighted to be here. I've been here 18 months, so this is my first in-person AGM at NBT, and it's really lovely to be able to see real people after what will have been sort of 3 years for many of us. Without being able to be in the same room. And it has been another extraordinary year, slightly different to the year before and extraordinary in lots of different ways. In 2021 we had a laser-like focus on COVID. That was all we talked about, that was where all our efforts went into. In 21-22 it was COVID, but it was everything else. Everything else started coming into the picture again. The waiting list, the care backlog, our long waiting lists in many areas, our cancer services, and an unprecedented increase in those attending urgent and emergency care services. And of course, other things going on in the community, which made the focus on hospital services even more apparent. This had lots of impacts on our staff as well as on our patients who were waiting in pain in difficult circumstances, and I think our staff were acutely aware that there were many people who weren't able to get the care they needed, and we really did feel that very, very acutely here. I think the impacts on our staff we'll talk about a little bit later. Jackie, our Chief People Officer, will talk about in more detail some of the points that come out in our annual report, the staffing challenges and how we're tackling them. Similarly, you'll also hear from Glyn Howells, our Chief Finance Officer, on how we achieved a financial break-even position last year, actually a small surplus in the end. So just to give you our overall formal stewardship, as you would expect in an annual general meeting. But before I do that, I wanted to, as Michelle has, offer a huge thank you to our staff for everything they do and in the most difficult circumstances. And I think we can all agree that in the history of the NHS, the 70 years, this has been the most unprecedented time, the most difficult time, the most unprepared time in a way. We've all been learning together, but it has been very, very challenging. And we know this, we get the feedback from our staff about how challenging it is. I go out and talk to staff a lot, as do all my executive colleagues. It's one of the best bits of our job, but we do hear about the distress at times. We do hear about energy levels, burnout. We see it sometimes in our turnover figures, our vacancy rates. This is reflected nationally, but NBT is no exception. We are having staffing challenges at the moment. I think we need to acknowledge that. And we therefore have to recognise the outstanding effort, the outstanding commitment our staff who remain with us are putting in all day, every day. I think that's why, you know, when we talk about the patient debt, the care debt that has built up, you will have read about it in the newspapers, enormous numbers of people waiting for services. So we had a huge elective, as we call it, planned care backlog. We've been able to make significant inroads into this. So we managed to reduce the number of patients waiting 104 weeks for treatment down to fewer than 100 by the end of March this year. And as we're here today, we don't have a single patient waiting more than 104 weeks. That still sounds like an enormous amount of time, but actually compared with many other trusts, we have met and exceeded our target. We're also now focusing on eliminating 78-week waits, and we will have done this. Our commitment is to have done this by March 23. So again, I would like to thank the Herculean effort that has gone into our staff to support this, and all the services that need to go into making sure this happens through diagnostic outpatient appointments, working with colleagues to make sure people are tracked across the lists and brought in at the right time. I think the other concern, so all of this it has happened at the same time, a care debt, a backlog, and this rise in attendance in urgent and emergency care. These huge pressures that we've been facing as more people have turned to us for their care perhaps not feeling that they were able to access care in places they may previously have gone. And so we have seen that reflected in attendances, in people coming along for advice that you may perhaps have expected them to have accessed in other settings. And people have found it a very convenient way of accessing the healthcare system, and that's also included increased ambulance attendance. And as a result, we've worked with colleagues. This is where our system, the integrated care system, which came into place formally in July this year, has been really helpful as we put together messages to the local residents and patients generally about how we signpost 111, our local pharmacy services, minor injury units, and other perhaps more suitable care environments than coming into A&E. And this is clearly a message that we're going to have to continue getting out to the public, particularly as we move into winter where attendance traditionally increases. And that's why I'm really proud we've been able to innovate in the most extraordinary way at NBT, recognising the scale of our ambulance handover problems, and you will all have seen in the news that people have been left at home while ambulances have been sometimes stuck outside A&E departments waiting to offload their patient and return to someone else, and everybody feeling very, very uncomfortable about where the risk is sitting, either within an emergency department, but also being very mindful that whilst an ambulance is outside an A&E, it's not turning round and going to pick up someone who may be lying on the floor at home. And you know, that propelled some of our amazing staff to come together to fast track some of the work they'd already been doing, and to look at some fantastic innovation, which we're going to hear a little bit more about later from our colleague James Cameron. So you know, we've been absolutely delighted with some of the work we've been doing there. Naturally now it's been deemed as a national exemplar, and we are trying to work with other colleagues around the country to look at the work we've done. We've also been working with NHS England and our regional team on a recovery plan around cancer. So we have not been meeting the cancer standards in the way we would wish to. We know that waiting for a cancer diagnosis, waiting for treatment is the most extraordinarily anxious time for the patient, for their families, and this is something we felt and still feel very uncomfortable about. We have been making inroads into this now. I'm very pleased to say that we're beginning to see some of our extra services, extra investment in these areas come to fruition, and we are now getting through the list in the way that we would like to, but still more to do. And I think it would be dishonest for us not to acknowledge these challenges. We have had them, and I think, you know, where we haven't met our targets, we need to be very clear that there is more work to do. So whilst we do acknowledge these challenges, I think it's also important that we celebrate some of the enormous achievements and success we've had over the year. And I just want to pick out one or two things. Michelle mentioned, you know, clapping for staff, and suddenly that stopped, and everyone was expected to get back into business as usual, and that was quite difficult actually, because suddenly the rhetoric changed, the media attention change became very, very critical of the NHS. And actually we felt it was really important to carry on making sure that staff know that they're valued. We held an annual thank you week, and we were absolutely touched and heartened by the number of messages we got in from patients and the public generally. The level of gratitude and support was really bolstering for our staff, and we had lots of really good feedback. We were able to resurrect our annual staff awards, where we acknowledge and value what our staff have been doing for us, and we continue with our regular NBT Hero celebrations, where once a month we pull out people who've been above and beyond, where their colleagues have nominated them for something because they are so overwhelmed by what they've done in lots of different areas. I also wanted to talk about our research teams, because Whilst we were all trying to tackle COVID, research went on. Unlike many other trusts, research and innovation continued at NBT, and we supported our ambitions to lead care innovation with more than 10,000 participants in trials, which is one of the highest trial communities over that period. We actually had more than 6,000 people involved in studies relating to COVID, and that really will have gone a long way into helping us live with this virus in the future. So some of those findings have been invaluable in looking at prevention and future care and treatment. Also, just wanted to mention our sustainable health team, where we support our ambition to become net zero by 2030. And again, while some of this work slowed during the pandemic, we remain absolutely committed to doing all we can to make our services more environmentally sound. So before concluding, I just want to bring us back to where I started, COVID, where we're now expected to live in a world which is living with COVID. And we have actually seen an increase in COVID in our hospital just over the last week. Some of that will be students coming back, some of that will be the world opening up in a different way, end of holidays, but we do need to keep reminding ourselves of that. Over the year, the efforts that we went to live with COVID were enormous. We played a huge role in vaccinating the local population. We pulled out all the stops to get to a place where as many people as possible could be vaccinated. It was also a year where we had to implement really strict infection prevention and control practices. Now, these, although obviously these were necessary, they did make things slower for staff. They were more cumbersome. We had to be very mindful of what we were doing, and it did add a different dimension, an extra dimension to how we care for patients with this extra set of expectations around it. And it did limit our flexibility as a hospital to use our space as we might wish to. And so I think that's why it's all the more remarkable, actually, that we've managed to hit some of our elective targets in the way that I described earlier. And finally, it was the year that we built a Nightingale Surge Hub. Now, they sound like that sounds like a small amount of words. It was, for anyone who saw it, an enormous build on our site. Quite incredible, the speed that it went up. The army were on site, weren't they? We had huge amounts of comings and goings, working 24/7, very much on a just-in-case basis. We built it. Making sure that we were planning for the worst but hoping for the best, and were absolutely delighted that in the end we did not need to use it, but it was a facility that was there. And I just wanted to commend all the staff who were involved in pulling that together. The disruption that caused, that meant staff couldn't park on site in various ways. All these impacts that our staff amazingly coped with during the year. So sometimes we're really quick to move on, too quick. So I did just want us to just take a moment to reflect what everyone has done and let it sink in, because this is extraordinary. It isn't just coming in and doing the day-to-day stuff. It's so much on top. And these are staff who are going home to see their families who may have been impacted by COVID, staff who are on a daily basis putting themselves in the way of contracting COVID themselves. So I did just want to have that acknowledged, the enormous effort and achievement over this last year. So I'd like to like Michelle, formally record personal thanks to each and every member of MBT staff for what an incredible group of people we have here. So finally, I'd like to thank the board of MBT for their unswerving support to me, to the exec team and to our staff. I'd like to thank the executive directors. I'm very proud of the team of executive directors we have here at MBT. All our divisional leaders, they do a really good job. We have a triumvirate covering each of our division. They take on a lot of responsibility and accountability. Our staff networks, those people who represent various groups within our staff who may feel marginalised and not not protected in the way that they would like to be. So we have lots of representation from them, and also our union colleagues who we work with in partnership as well. We have a recognition agreement which we take very seriously, and we meet and work in partnership in, I think, one of the most productive ways I've ever seen actually in the NHS. So, and most of all, I'd like to thank our patients and carers. They keep us on the straight and narrow, they keep us accountable, their feedback helps us get better, it keeps us on a journey of continuous improvement and never getting complacent. And I think that's really important, that we feel we want to be focused and determined, so that when we report this time next year, we're able to show you even more improvement, and what you've heard today you can see being built on incrementally. And so that's where I'd like to draw things to a close. Hopefully you'll have seen why I've described 21-22 as an extraordinary year. I think we're going to show a very short video which probably picks up one or two bits of how the year has passed. And thank you.
I would just like to say thank you very much to everybody at Southmead for looking after me.
Exceptionally courteous, considerate. What more can I say?
I just want to say a massive thank you to all the staff at the Bristol Brain Centre.
I was very well looked after. Thank you very much.
It's really, really tough at the moment, and I can't thank you and your teams enough for all the work that you're doing to keep our patients safe.
My message this month is a really simple one. I want to say an absolutely enormous thank you to everyone in the organisation.
I can't believe it's a year ago since I last did a video about COVID vaccinations at North Bristol Trust, but a year has gone by. As a system, we've given over 2 million vaccinations.
We're going through a really busy time at the moment.
So we're just asking our patients to think if there might be an alternative for you. It's not the emergency department.
For me, pride means being recognised as an individual and being part of a rainbow culture.
Pride means to me having the freedom and support to be yourself, whatever that means to you.
I'm proud to be black as I love our culture. I'm proud to be black as everyone is our brother or our sister.
Celebrating my name, I'm very proud of my name. It was actually given to me by my mom, my late mom.
And I'm proud to be called as Duresh Etwar.
I'm proud to hear my name.
It's been one of the most challenging times in the NHS history, and you've all worked so hard and you've achieved so many amazing things. And I think the first thing I want to say, how absolutely proud we are of each and every one of our incredible staff who's contributed to everything we do here in MBT.
Most people show us respect, but sadly, a very small minority do not.
This can be violence,
discrimination,
bullying,
or harassment. Please speak up and report any abuse you experience or witness.
Everyone is protected.
My name's Tim Bevan. I'm one of the general porters at Southmead Hospital. I love meeting different patients every day. I love the social interaction I have with them and my colleagues.
We support our patients to be more active and enhance their physical and emotional well-being in preparation for their leaving hospital.
It's a great entry-level job for the IT industry, and I don't need to go to the gym anymore because it's always keeping me moving.
I would like to recognize and thank all our volunteers for your amazing work. You know, North Bristol is very grateful for everything you do for us.
There'll be a post box outside our pavilion for you all to put in thank you letters to your colleagues, and they will be delivered across the trust.
Your commitment to our patients is just phenomenal. We're seeing a real great 1NBT response to dealing with the challenges that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you one and all.
Thank you so much.
The treatment that I've received here has been absolutely superb, and thank you to all concerned.
Thank you, Maria. I'd like to invite now Glyn Howells, who is our Chief Financial Officer, to come and give you an overview, financial overview of the annual accounts.
It's the bit that everyone's been looking forward to. Lock the door. So, 21-22. COVID it ended up with a suspension of our normal financial regime. So in the acute hospitals, historically we get paid for the activity we do. You get paid at a tariff for the activity you do. That was suspended, and so instead we were funded at our historical cost base with an allowance for reasonable costs that were incurred in dealing with COVID. So what does that mean? We received 792 million of income, which is a small increase on the previous year. Over the year we managed our spend within that, and a small surplus was delivered. And when I say small, it was 2.2 million, and people sort of say, well, that's not small. We spend £792 million a year. That is £2.2 million per day. So if you can imagine trying to run your household finances with your salary and end the last day of the year with exactly nothing left in there. If you only have one day's sort of money left, that's quite a good achievement. So we're very pleased that we managed to. It's a failure if we get there and we've got too much of a profit, because it means we've not spent money providing care. And it's a failure if we get there and we spend too much, because I get in real trouble for that. I'm really pleased to say that during the year we still, despite the fact that we're dealing with a couple of waves of COVID and then elective recovery in between there, we still managed to find £3.6 million worth of efficiencies. And why is that important? Because whilst we're going through all of this, our clinicians are identifying areas where we're not providing a level of care that we want to, and we need more money to put into those areas. And so what we do, we have to deliver the efficiencies so that we can find the money to fund the improvements in care in those areas. So I'm really pleased that we managed to do that. We also had a planned capital programme which we delivered, and it was a very challenging year. If you can imagine, with infection prevention and control measures in place during the year, trying to get capital works done around the site was really difficult, but we managed to achieve that. So on to the next slide. So we spent £31.7 million worth of capital. I always think it's really, us accountants get excited by these capital numbers, but actually what does it mean to a patient? What does that actually impact mean to a patient? We spent £7 million buying Bristol Centre for Enablement out at Cribbs Causeway. So this is something that's not on this site. It's a service that's sort of invisible to many people. It's a regional service. We provide specialist prosthetic services to people who've lost limbs through veterans or other reasons. And there's also one really special service that we provide. So for across most of the southwest, we provide home adaptations to allow people to end their life at home. So people who are suffering illnesses and need some help in getting their home to be their final place. It's a critical place. We've been operating out of leased facilities, but what that means is we can't quite adapt those facilities to be as good as they need to be to provide those services. So now we own it, we can make adaptations in there, and in fact one of the things we've done is we've facilitated getting a 3D printing area, which means we're able to tailor prosthetics better and faster to provide service to our patients. 2.5 million towards new modular offices in Kendon. What that's done is it's created the space for us to take some people out of the Brunel building to start to convert some of that space to greater for clinical use. So this has enabled us to make an extra 33 beds available to get us through this winter. More than £5 million of replacing medical equipment. I could spend that 10 times over. There is a great team that work to prioritise what medical equipment we need to replace each year, and £5 million went through there. And 1.8 million towards our electronic patient record system that went live earlier this year. And what does that mean to the patient? Well, it means that clinicians have got better information available for them at their fingertips, and they can provide that updates to that system more quickly to release time to care, to improve the care that we provide to our patients. And again, I talked about that being, in terms of our turnover, it's £2.2 million a day. For our capital side, we're spending £600,000 every week to try to improve patient care. In terms of cash, the Trust managed its working capital and cash position during the year. So this is really important, because if we don't manage our cash, we end up not being able to pay our suppliers in time, and we end up having to not have the money to provide capital to provide this replacement things that we need. So it's really important we manage that cash. We closed the year out with over 100 million in the bank, which means that we can address all of our cash needs going forward without needing help from anywhere else, which is a really important position. A bit of a technicality now. Onto the next one. We had a couple of they're called qualifications on our accounts. So no accountant likes to have their accounts qualified, because it means something's not quite right. So let me just explain a little bit about why our accounts were technically qualified. During COVID, as we went into the first wave of COVID, we weren't able to count our inventory. So at the time, we held about £14 million worth of inventory around the hospitals. We couldn't go out and count it because we were getting the hospital ready for no one knew what was going to be happening at that time. So for our 1920 accounts, those were qualified because we weren't able to count our stock. So there's a big number on the balance sheet that the auditors couldn't sign off on. The next year, the way you calculate how much money you've spent on materials is you add your opening stock to what you spend in the year and take off your closing stock. Because we hadn't counted our opening stock, then our cost of sales, the materials we used, couldn't be validated, so we were qualified again. And unfortunately in the NHS, as we move into this financial year, we have to have a comparative year. So the fact that it was qualified in the next year, we haven't got a comparative that we can put against it. So we were qualified simply on the fact that we had a qualified comparative figure. So that's the end of that one. That one will disappear this year, and it's a pure technicality. There's no issues there at all. The other issue that we have to write to the Secretary of State about each year is the fact we have an accumulated deficit. So MBT except for the last 3 years, was operating at a deficit each year. So as a consequence, we've built up a deficit of around 90 million, and all trusts have a requirement to not have a deficit, and so we have to write to the Secretary of State every year and say we have a deficit. On the grounds that actually we're only ever going to break even or make a small surplus of 1 or 2 million, we're never going to clear that deficit. It's going to take us about 40 years. And so we're going to be writing to the Secretary of State, otherwise we're going to have a separate file just for MBT. As part of our audit, we also get audited on value for money, and this is important. So this is saying that how are we allocating the resources? Are we controlled in how we're allocating resources? Are we allocating them in the right way? Are clinicians involved in prioritising what we're doing? And I'm really pleased to say that again, the auditors have found that there are no significant weaknesses. And whilst that sounds like damning with faint praise, that's as good as it gets, that there are no material weaknesses. They never say you've done a cracking job. It's just like, okay, we haven't found anything. But that is really important, because that shows that we're following good processes to make sure that we're not wasting money. So that's looking backwards. So looking forward as we move into this financial year. We've had money removed now, so we're no longer getting the bailout of any reasonable COVID costs, so that's been taken away. We are not going back to the previous arrangements about getting paid for the activity that we do. The view under the new Health and Social Care Act is that actually systems need to work together and allocate resources to where the care is needed for patients. So what does that mean? Historically, a frail and elderly patient may have gone to see their GP, and there's some worry that there might be something worsening, so they'd be sent in for an outpatient appointment, where maybe they'd admitted. We then do a load of tests, and then they come into hospital a few days, and then we have to go through a whole reablement thing to get them back out again. And that's how the system was set up, and that's how people were paid to do these separate stages of that care. Through ICS working, those sorts of things, we will start to put in place things like the GP can phone a specialist geriatrician, someone who specialises in this area, to get some advice about how they can manage that patient at home, where the patient is better off, rather than go through the disruption of coming back in again. And it's sort of recognising that the system, as it was set up, was driving perverse incentives to count and measure things, when actually there could be a better way of doing these to save the acute hospital for the people who need those acute interventions. So we're working with the system on how we do that. We've got to try and catch up this care debt that Maria talked about. So we've used 1920 as the baseline to say actually we need to do 4% more activity than we did in those years to start to catch up that care debt. And so we are funded to try to deliver that, and we're on track in some areas, not quite in other areas, as Maria mentioned, but we're on track to do much of that. We're working much more closely with the integrated care system. I spend probably a day a week of my life working with the system on trying to take the good out of the old systems of how we worked, but then calculate how we can make things better to make sure that the money is following the care that we need to provide, and that the money is not getting in the way of how we want to provide care in this integrated way. As a local health system, we are planning to break even for 22-23, and that sits within each provider as well. So money has been passed round so that each provider also breaks even, but as a system we break even. And it's really moving towards a place where we're focusing on ensuring that we get the best out of our resources for the population that we serve. So that's me.
Thank you very much. So now the really exciting part. So the money makes it all go round, but actually without people like James Cameron and his team, we wouldn't get anything done. So you want to know how busy the hospital is, James? We'd come into ED, wouldn't we, and just see exactly the pressures that you and your team are under. So I'm really thrilled. We've dragged you out of there for a little while to just come and give us some real sense of what it's like. So you're really welcome.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm embarrassed it's my first AGM that I've attended, but I'm glad to be here. We were supposed to have Anna, our matron, who is actually the one who volunteered us to speak today, but she's got COVID, so she's at home, so she says. What we've done this year is we've done a lot of work on one of the really sort of, as Steve calls it, one of those sort of wicked problems in the NHS, really, which is ambulances stacking up outside hospitals, and it's a horrible thing to see. And it's a real problem that we've been struggling with, and that every hospital across the country is really struggling with. And indeed, on my national WhatsApp group of ED clinical leads today, there were several hospitals who said we've had people waiting 24 hours in an ambulance, and their record today is 36 hours in an ambulance. That's 3 entire 12-hour shifts of paramedics coming in, going home, looking after people outside hospitals, so it can get horrific. There's been a real problem in every hospital with the flow of patients through the hospital, so we can get up to 200 or more patients in the Brunel building who are really fit for discharge and ideally should be leaving hospital, but are waiting for non-hospital care outside NVT. And that has a huge impact. As we say, the COVID IPC restrictions have just slowed everything down, made everything more complicated, slowed down the movement of patients. The cohorting of patients is a real challenge. And we've had huge delays, particularly for frail elderly patients, and that's where it's so iniquitous, these delays, because the patients who arrive who are fit to sit, they come straight off an ambulance, but the patients who are elderly and frail and sick are in ambulances for a long time and in the ED for a long time sometimes. So I've seen a patient who was 101 years old who spent 10 hours in an ambulance waiting to come into the building, and that's just awful. She did all right. My SEMA saw her on the ward and tells me she was doing all right, but it's horrible, really. So this is last summer, and this is Anna, our matron, explaining to Points West about how pressured we are, how difficult it is, how to really think about whether you really need an ambulance and what to do. So what we've achieved is that this has been really a massive team effort across the whole of MBT, but particularly in the Division of Medicine, and we've managed to establish regular flow of medical admitted patients out of the ED and bring that earlier in the day and making it more regular. And what that's enabled is that we've really massively reduced the ambulance queues. And we pretty much stopped seeing patients in ambulances now, whereas we used to be seeing most of our majors patients, we used to see them in ambulances. It's really improved patient safety, and it's actually, this wasn't why we did it, but it has really improved the morale and the feeling of sort of moral injury for ED staff, where you feel like you can actually do your job, you can actually do emergency medicine rather than just risk manage who's the sickest person that we're going to prioritise first. And this is the impact. So if you look at the graph on the right first, there's a few graphs, and Richard took some of them out, but there's a few, I said we've got to have some. So on the right side, you can see that red line on the top is the 8 weeks before we moved to our new flow model. And you can see that there was an average of 32 admitted patients in the emergency department through the 24 hours from midnight to midnight. A bit less at night, a bit more in the day. So that's like an entire ward full of patients stuck in the ED with no bed in the hospital to go to because the hospital has got nowhere to move patients on. And the wards struggle when they're 3 patients up or 4 patients up, and we were 32 patients up. And every emergency department in the country is really struggling with this. And you can see in the 8 weeks after, that has dropped down to about 16, so it's halved. So that's made a huge difference to us in what we're able to do. And you can see on the left, we were averaging 90 patients in the department, and now that's dropped to 60. So as well as having 16 fewer admitted patients in the department, we're able to process our other patients quicker. And there's on average another 15 patients that we've managed to see and treat and discharge home. And this sign is my favourite sign. So this sign is outside the ambulance entrance, and it's on the other side of it is red and says there's no space, leave your patient in the ambulance, come and ask the nurse how long it's going to be before you can offload them. And this one is green. And in July, the nurse had to take a screwdriver to it to flip it open because it had just been stuck on red for 6 months. So we're thrilled to see this green sign most of the time now. And this is the impact of it. So this graph is of SWAST, of the ambulance response times in our region, right? So the red line is the average response time to a Category 2 call to SWAST. And that, you can see in the first half of July, that was creeping up to 3 hours, but with the longest waits going up to 8 hours or 10 hours sometimes. And a Category 2 call is like broken hip, really short of breath, really sick. So those have dropped right down, and that's because we're not stacking ambulances outside the ED like we were. So the real problem is about medical patients, and the reason for that is that there's just much more medical patients than any other specialty put together. So there's twice as many medical patients as everyone else put together, which is 35 patients a day, or 13,000 patients a year roughly. And the trouble is, if we're always struggling, if we're always on the back foot, then you end up keeping 30 of those patients in the ED all the time and never catching up. And that is basically where most emergency departments are at. So our challenge was to make a massive effort to clear the backlog once and then stay on top and keep on top and deal with every patient. And so this is the analogy for it really, is the doctor's mess sink. And I don't know if you remember this sort of look from your student days. So if you let the washing up stack up, it's really annoying. There's no clean plates or dishes. Everything takes longer. You might break a glass while you're trying to find a cup. Everything's more difficult. If you wash up once, you're still going to use the same number of cups and plates, and this is really what the emergency department is like. If we're full of admitted patients, we're like that full sink. We want to be where we can process people much more quicker and more safely. So this was quite instructional. So we had a patient who came in, big bags, said he was going to blow up the airport with a bomb, but decided to come and blow up the hospital instead. And very scary moment for one of our nurses who risk assessed it and said, we've got to take this guy seriously. And it was an amazing response by the hospital. All of our majors and resus patients whooshed off to AMU in minutes. The whole of minors, our ambulatory patients, they were all cleared out in minutes. And it was really amazing, and it's so good that we thought we've got to pay someone to do this every Monday because it's so brilliant. Go on to the next slide. You can see that actually hospitals don't cope well with surges. It was really tough afterwards. So first of all, we diverted to the BRI for 4 hours, and that kind of broke the BRI, and they ended up diverting back to us for 14 hours. And then we had terrible exit block. Basically, patients didn't move out of the ED for the next sort of 24 plus hours, and we were absolutely in our worst position ever. So we were like, right, never have that again. And then back in July, Maria convened us all. So with the heat wave, we were facing a position where we had 30 admitted patients in the ED, where we had 18 ambulances outside, full of frail elderly patients, because they're the people who aren't fit to sit. And the forecast was for 40-degree heat outside, and it was really time to do something extraordinary and something different. And so that's what we've tried to do. And this is it, and it's quite simple, and it seems a bit basic, but what we did is we looked at all the data about how many people are we sending to the acute medical unit every day, how many people are we sending to the acute frailty unit every day, and then what time of day are they coming. And it turns out that it's quite even, and it's about 12 per ward. So the acute medical unit, which is a double ward, takes 24 patients a day, and the acute frailty unit takes 12 patients a day. And then we said, right, let's do that. And let's just plan ahead. And the amazing thing about emergency medicine is it's very predictable. We deal with big numbers. We have 300 people a day. It's very predictable. So what that enables us to do is to be ready. So the nurses are ready, the porters are ready, they've had their antibiotics, they've had their catheter or whatever it is, and you can stick to that rigid timeline. There's no being given 8 beds are ready on the ward, quick, do 8 transfers, and you're like, well, I don't have 8 porters, I don't have 8 sets of nurses to do transfers. And then we're doing the same thing now with the acute medical unit, because we're taking patients to the acute medical unit, they need to take patients onto the inpatient specialty wards. So there's 9 further inpatient specialty wards. And they average 39 patients a day, but what we're doing is making those more automatic, making those more expected, and bringing them really much earlier in the day. And that's making a real difference for the acute medical unit to be able to deal with the patients as they come in. So the challenge is when there's no beds and really maintaining flow even when there's no beds. And we knew we had a backlog of about 45 patients in the ED, so we were expecting 45 side rooms to go up to double occupancy across the trust. But it actually peaked at 8. So what that was everybody working like crazy across the hospital, drastically reducing cleaning times, increasing the use of the discharge lounge, doing whatever they can, and all the different solutions that they are the best people to come up with on all those medical wards to process patients quicker and to catch up with that backlog. And it's a big ask because we're short of nurses. We're particularly short of nurses on the backlog, on the night shift. And we're very often red for staffing in different areas, and people call up Steve and say, quick, what are we going to do here? And we're moving nurses around. So we've managed to do this not with extra nurses or not with extra discharges from the hospital. SWAST haven't given us a break and gone somewhere else. It's just really been all those staff taking a really big step up. And being honest with people, and so this letter was from Steve, our Chief Nursing Officer, to explain to people we're in a tight spot and you might have to double up in your cubicles. And people were amazingly open and understanding and sort of wanting to do their bit with it. We didn't really have any complaints. So really, it's worked. We've had massive safety gains through patients not being stuck on the back of ambulances for a long time. And Chris Brooks-Dorr, who's the sort of patient safety lead, has actively gone to all the wards and said, tell me if there's any problems, counter the number of day ticks we have for adverse incidents. And there's been no increase in many of the wards of adverse incidents for safety. But we have had a lot of reduced day ticks and adverse incidents in the emergency department, because when people are stuck on ambulances, you don't know what's wrong with them and they haven't been assessed, and they may have a diabetic emergency or sepsis that's undiagnosed, and or they may be bleeding and you don't know, and that's what's so important to offload them. So it's been a big safety improvement for the trust, and it's really this whole hospital approach that's made the difference. And it's not just an ED problem, it's a whole hospital problem. The whole hospital working together has made a difference, and now we have people from lots of different hospitals who are emailing us and contacting us and asking us to speak to them from London or the Southwest or the Midlands, and it's nice to be part of something that's making a difference. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And you know, doesn't that speak to commitment and compassion and to dedication, and just the way that everybody's come together, to actually find a way to solve our own problem, and the benefits of that. So James, thank you, and thank you to the whole team, and thank you to the rest of the hospital. But it's just really such an example of using innovation to actually make it possible to do the best we can for our patients. So you've heard us talk a lot about staff. James has said it. We have got a staffing crisis, no question about that. But we're not alone. It's true wherever you go in the NHS, or indeed wherever you go in social care. So I'd like to ask Jackie Marshall, who's our Chief People Officer, to just come and give us a flavour of some of the things we're trying to do.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michelle. And good afternoon, everybody. So I'm here to talk about our people, and put simply, they absolutely are our most precious resource. I'm reminded of it every day of the year as I meet our staff across the hospital and hear about their quality and huge compassionate work they're doing with our patients. So I'm going to start by just telling you how fabulous and professional our staff are. Obviously, many of them have direct day-to-day contact with patients, but many others work behind the scenes, keeping our hospital going 24/7, our cleaners, our porters, our IT staff, our secretaries. But they all have one thing in common, and that really is their desire to ensure that our patients get their best possible care. We're really proud of our staff, and they have had the most challenging couple of years, living and of course working through the pandemic, the subsequent backlogs, the catch-up, and now coping with a really hard-hitting cost of living crisis. There have been staff shortages in the NHS for quite some time, and MBT is no different in that respect. And over the years, and to a certain extent, staff have learnt how to cope with shortages. Many of our staff agree to work additional shifts, and others just do more to cover vacancies and staff shortages. But it's true to say that the situation that we're in right now is particularly acute. It's really a perfect storm. The low unemployment rates across the UK, together with rising inflation, means there's an increased wage competition across the whole of the labour workforce in the UK. So this, together with the work pressures that you've heard that we face, has resulted in an increase of staff turnover in the last financial year to 17%, and this is compared with 13% pre-pandemic. And the slight worrying thing about this data is our staff are not only leaving us, they're leaving healthcare altogether, and many people are taking up roles in other sectors such as retail. So while we've managed to recruit 1,800 new starters last year, which to any example is a really, really impressive figure, This is no ordinary time, and the perfect storm that we're experiencing means we need to recruit even more people, and that's going to be tough. Going forward, that will be tough. There is no magic wand here. So we continue to recruit nurses from overseas to support our own domestic nurse recruitment. Last year we welcomed 110 experienced overseas nurses, and this year we'll be adding to that and including midwives, occupational therapists and imaging staff too. But we're also really keen to continue a very, very proactive approach from our own local and to recruit from our own local community, and we're keen to establish career pathways so people can join as porters, become non-registered nurses and go all the way through to become registered nurses. Key to this UK pipeline is our apprenticeship programme, and I'm pleased to report to you all we have a thriving programme here. During 21-22, we offered 5 different in the trust. We have over 300 apprentices doing different parts of their schemes. Most of those people go on to have full-time and permanent roles with us at North Bristol Trust. But recruitment is only part of the story. Retaining our dedicated and skilled staff is absolutely key for us. And that's why we gave even greater emphasis on staff retention in 21-22, particularly focusing on equality, diversity and inclusion, staff well-being, but also trying to improve our employee offer. We continue to remain committed to achieving an inclusive culture. As an executive team, we work with colleagues from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds on a reciprocal mentoring programme. We're offering a range of development, mentoring and coaching, so people don't just get a job with us, they get a career here at MBT. We're very proud of our energetic staff diversity networks, which were mentioned earlier. We see those as a really important conduit for communications, but also for an effective real-time sort of bellwether as to how our staff are seeing and hearing and feeling. Indeed, it was thanks to feedback from one of our staff networks that we developed our Red Card to Racism and Abuse. We've had a huge fan campaign, and this is a visible and very vocal demonstration to our staff, to our patients and to our visitors that we don't tolerate any inappropriate behaviour or any form of prejudice here. This particular Red Card to Racism and Abuse has been taken up not only with other partners across the system, but has been adopted with Bristol City Council partners and other partners within our community. Supportive approaches and listening to our staff remains absolutely key and is at the core of everything we do, which really brings me to talk about well-being. We have an award-winning wellbeing package of which we're very proud here, and it's probably one of the most comprehensive packages offered in the NHS. But last year we kept on adding to it and encouraging staff to really take advantage and take ownership of their wellbeing. Things that are included is things like Physio Direct. This is a simple way that staff can self-refer and get access to physio here at work. We have discounted staff memberships, and we have a huge amount of psychological support from our in-house psychology team. We also have an employee assistance programme which provides free and confidential 24/7 support to all of our staff. So the cost of living in particular is affecting many of people, and it's adding to the challenges that we're facing with retention. And for that reason, we're working up a range of financial wellbeing measures as well, so we can really strengthen our employee offer. We simply have to do all we can to retain staff. These include things like subsidised food at work, free and subsidised parking for staff, access to the blue light discount card, independent financial advice for staff via the Employee Assistance Programme, and also, and increasingly important, access to affordable credit and support with housing. We absolutely cannot do enough to retain staff and to try and reduce that turnover, but also to continue to make ourselves really attractive as an employer for new staff. So that's just a little roundup of some of the stuff that we've been doing in the last year to support our staff. As we go forward, the challenge is huge to continue. It won't be easy, but we're very focused on our approach. We continue to be caring and compassionate in our demeanour, and we will do all we can to ensure our patients get the best possible care here at MBT, and we still remain a great place to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, very much. So that concludes the formal part of the presentations. I think the overarching message is that if we thought getting through COVID was the requirement, we were wrong. The world is never going to look the same as it did before COVID, and what we do as an organisation is never going to look the same as it did before COVID. And really the challenges have only just begun, in actual fact. If we thought the challenge was getting through COVID and keeping the hospital running through COVID, that felt immensely tough. But hey, we're out the other side of it, we hope, or the worst of it. But many of those challenges are even bigger. And so they're staffing, they're just trying to run a hospital in very difficult and uncertain times. We've got a few minutes for questions if anybody has any questions that they'd like to raise. You've got the executive team here, and if we can, we'll try and answer them. Have any of our staff got any questions? No? Question? Yes, hello. Would you just like to tell us who you are?
Yeah. My name is Brenda Massey. I'm Councillor for Southmead. I'm also Chair of Avon Farmer Authority.
Yes. Very well.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much to everybody for all you've done over the last year or so. A number of our firefighters have actually come forward to work with the ambulance service, helping out, and I wondered if that had actually been useful, because I know they're finding it very rewarding.
Oh, okay. Steve, can you pick that up?
I'm Steve. I'm Chief Operating Officer here at MBT. I know that scheme has been quite popular across the country in two ways. In terms of response for patients who fall at home in particular, and I think the fire service has been really, really helpful in putting some procedures in and avoiding some of the emergency ambulances having to go to those calls, and actually keeping people at home rather than transferring them to hospital where often they're exposed to some risk. So that's one area where I know they're helping, and I think it's very valuable.
Great, thank you. It's just I'd like to go back and say
yes.
It has been useful.
Hugely.
I think you can absolutely tell them it's been extremely useful.
I had experience working with a fire officer in the back of an ambulance, and he was extremely helpful and gave me a lovely tune.
That's great. I mean, isn't it interesting how when we face challenges you suddenly discover that all sorts of different people can come together to make something work. And there aren't many benefits of COVID, but I guess one of the benefits of COVID has been we have learnt new ways to do things because we've had to. So yes, please go back and tell them it's extremely valuable. Have we any other questions? Well, if we haven't, thank you very much indeed for coming. Really nice to see you, and really nice to see those of you that are members of staff. Please go back and tell your colleagues that we so appreciate what they've done and what they continue to do. You hear me say it over and over again, but I never cease to be amazed by the dedication and the compassion that the people in this organisation show. So thank you, and thank you very much, everybody.